Hello and thank you for joining me. My name is Mike Roberts, and in this video, I want to take a quick look at something that I believe will be important for all of us. It's a subject that applies to every one of us, and it is the peace of the Lord. I want to take a few minutes and examine some things the Bible tells us about the peace of Christ. And in this world, it seems like sometimes peace is kind of hard to come by, but the Bible teaches us that peace comes with our relationship with Jesus. As a matter of fact, in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, before Jesus was ever born, Isaiah prophesied his birth and said that one of his names would be the Prince of Peace. And so peace is inherently linked to Jesus. So as we walk with him, even though there may not be very much peace in the world, I believe we're called to experience peace because peace, again, is inherently a part of the nature of Jesus. And he gives this peace to us as we walk with him. And the primary verse I want to read in this video is in the book of Colossians in chapter 3. It's verse 15. Now this verse is right in the middle of a conversation that Paul is having with the Christians at Colossae, and he's admonishing them and instructing them about their relationships with each other. And in the middle of this, he says in verse 15, "And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful." Now I want to focus on that, the first part of that where he says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Let it be in charge. Let it rule in your hearts. Let's think about peace for a second. And how would you define peace? Now, the obvious definition would be that peace is the absence of conflict. Peace is the absence of war. Peace is when things are quiet. And for me personally, I think about a peaceful place being maybe in the mountains, tucked away in some remote cabin away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. And those are peaceful times. But the kind of peace that Jesus gives us is peace that we experience even when we're in the midst of conflict. Even if we're in the midst of war and in the midst of everyday life, the peace that Jesus gives us is present and is the reality for us, or can be the reality for us, even when there's anything but peace taking place around us. And Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 says that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. And I believe that peace is inherently a part of his nature and is something that we should be experiencing as we walk with him. And so here Paul says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Now, as most of you are aware, the Bible was not originally written in English. As a matter of fact, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew to start with, and in the Old Testament, the word for peace is shalom, and most of us know that. And in the New Testament, in the Greek, the word is eirene. And what they both mean is the same thing. It doesn't just mean the absence of conflict, but what it means is we are whole. You can imagine for a second like a circle, like a pie or a pizza, and it's cut into pieces, but every piece is there. Every piece is present in this circle. That's what it means to really be at peace. That's what it means to really have peace. It's not just to have no conflict going on, not just to have no battles or no warfare or to have no noise, even though we love to have those times we can take a vacation and escape those things for a period of time. But the peace of Christ is peace that brings wholeness to who we are. It's when our emotions and our mind and who we are, our spirit, we are one piece. So being at peace means we're not in pieces. It's when you have that complete circle and all the pieces are there. That's what it really means to be at peace. And again, Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. And Jesus, not long before he was going to be crucified, he told his disciples, he says, I'm going to leave you peace when I go, not peace like the world gives. Because the world's peace at the very best is temporary. And the world's peace is usually based on circumstances. We get things aligned just right, and we can experience some peace. But again, the peace that Jesus gives us is peace that is there right in the middle of the storms of life. And Jesus himself, again, is called the Prince of Peace. In Romans 16:20, Paul said, and the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. So we can see there's a definite war going on with the enemy, but it's the God of peace that will soon crush him under our feet. That's the power of peace. So again, let's imagine peace not just being the absence of conflict. Let's imagine that circle. Let's imagine like an apple pie or a pizza, and all the pieces are there. Now, the way this world is and the way this life is for us sometimes, it's easy to get broken into pieces. It's easy to be fragmented, to have one piece of us over here, one piece of us over there. Our emotions are broken into pieces, and there's part over here and part over here and part over here. But that's not the kind of peace that Jesus wants us to have. So what does it mean here when Paul said, let the peace of Christ rule in your heart? I mentioned before how this was written originally in Greek. Now the Greek word for peace is eirene, and the word here for rule has to do with being an umpire. Now imagine a baseball game. The umpire is the person who gets the final say. If we're not sure who's safe, who's out, the umpire decides that, and whatever he says or whatever she says goes. So the umpire gets the final say as to who's safe and who's out. So if a batter hits the ball and is running around the bases and he runs toward home base and he slides in and no one's sure whether he's safe or out, the umpire makes the call as to whether he's allowed to stay at home or if he's out. Now that's what Paul was saying that peace is to do in our hearts. He says, let peace be the umpire in your hearts. So let's look again at this baseball analogy. The umpire decides who is safe and who is out. In that same sense, as the baseball player slides to home base, your home is much more than just your house. Your home actually is your heart. I believe our hearts are more our home than our house is. So peace is the one who decides who gets to stay and who has to go. Peace is the umpire, or Paul tells us to let peace be the umpire in our hearts. Let peace decide who's safe and can stay and who's out, who has to go. And in this world, there are a lot of things competing for our attention, a lot of things competing for our devotion, and a lot of things will take a piece of our emotions and leave us fragmented, or a piece of our minds and leave us fragmented. But Jesus intends for us to be whole. He intends for us to be a whole person with the whole circle in peace. That's what he wants to do. Again, he's called the Prince of Peace, and the God of peace will soon crush the enemy under our feet. And Jesus said in John chapter 16, verse 33, he had just been talking about the fact that he was going to leave, and even though it wasn't going to be easy, he said, I'm leaving peace with you. And he says, I have shared these things with you. I've spoken these things to you so that in me you might have peace. In the world, you're going to have trouble. He uses the word tribulation. You're going to have tribulation. But he says, be of good cheer. Take joy because I have overcome the world. So the peace he gives us, even though the world may be in chaos at times, and the world will be increasingly intense until Jesus returns, but the peace he gives us becomes our reality if we let it, even in the middle of all that. So Paul says, when you decide what gets to come into your heart, into your home, your heart, let peace be the one who has the final say. Just like the umpire in a baseball game gets the final say as to who is safe and who is out, let's let the peace of Christ rule our hearts. Let the peace of Christ be the umpire who decides who is safe and who is out. And when something comes into our heart or into our life and it begins to draw our attention away, ask ourselves this: is that compliant with the peace of Christ? Or does that try to distract us from his peace? If it's a distraction, kick it out. If it's there to help us maintain peace, to bring the other fruits of the Spirit, that's fine, it can stay. But let peace decide that. So when something comes in that begins to attack our peace, take our peace away, that means it shouldn't be there, because peace gets the final say as to who's safe and who's out. So again, let the peace of Christ rule our hearts. Let peace serve as the umpire who gets the final say. So peace, again, is inherently a part of the nature of Jesus. And as we walk with him, his peace is increasingly available to us to make us that whole person. And let's let that peace of Christ, rule our hearts.